Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening, great to have your company. Here's what's coming up tonight on the show. The Labor government warns Israel to change course following the tragic death of an Australian aid worker in Gaza. If only they'd been as quick to respond to the October 7 massacre. Our relationship with China is set to be tested as a delegation of Australian MPs prepares to travel to Taiwan. Now, I'll speak with one of the delegates about the trip and why he believes the next stop should be Ukraine, despite official government advice warning him to stay away. The Brittany Higgins saga continues, with the federal government blocking the release of secret documents regarding her massive $2.4 million payout. And our new Governor-General designate, Sam Mostyn, upset at how you voted in the Voice referendum.
I, frankly, after the referendum, I felt completely untethered because I thought perhaps we were a big enough nation and there was enough understanding to actually make that step. I'm horrified to think about what I thought Australia was growing up with the Captain Cook story, and no mention of First Peoples or of frontier wars or any of that hidden from us. So it's a catastrophe because I think that led to what we then saw at the most recent referendum in Australia.
We will come back to that later, but first, the Prime Minister today patting himself on the back for preparing more energy bill relief in the budget, but it's his own government's policies that are putting power bills through the roof in the first place. It's the government's emissions obsession that's killing the economics of coal-fired power and making it so much harder to develop new gas-fired power, even though that's what we need to keep the lights on. Three headlines today yet again highlight our energy policy insanity. First, the Australian Financial Review, which exposed the danger to New South Wales power supply if the country's biggest power station, Eraring, closes as planned in August next year. Rooftop solar power, well, it's abundant during the day but not existent at night, means that coal-fired power from Eraring is hardly economic because it can only get a decent return at night, even though we still rely on coal for 60% of our total electricity. So what's the impact? Well, it means that because federal government subsidies for wind and solar have so distorted the market, we now need state subsidies for coal-fired power. All these big generators that we need to keep the lights on would all go under. So taxpayers end up paying 3 times over. First, we pay as consumers through high power bills, and that's because there are laws that force generators to buy renewable energy certificates. Second, we pay as federal taxpayers through the budget for all the energy welfare handouts. And third, we're hit again as state taxpayers because of the subsidies needed to keep these coal-fired power stations running or to help big players like smelters keep them going with subsidised power, like in Victoria. Another headline today also showed how this is all going to get worse, not better, thanks to the Albanese government's hard left green agenda. As reported in The Australian, there is yet another attempt by tax-funded green groups to sabotage fossil fuel developments. This time, it's a new coal mine in Queensland near Moranbah in the Bowen Basin, which is already home to some of our biggest coal mines. The Australian Conservation Foundation, backed by the Environmental Defenders Office, that's right, you fund them through your taxes, well, it is challenging the State Land Court for the approval that the new Whitehaven mine will and shouldn't go ahead, it says. It's just been given the approval, but they don't want it to go ahead from the Queensland government. Now, their argument is that burning coal increases emissions, which causes climate change, which in turn harms the human rights of children and Indigenous people. Now, it's a pretty long bow, but it's drawing on a previous Land Court decision to block an earlier coal development on similar grounds. And it shows the determination of green groups that you're being forced to fund them as taxpayers to stop all and any new fossil fuel developments, even though coal and gas remain 2 of our 3 biggest exports. And without these developments, there are no plausible substitutes in many of our industrial processes, nor do we have another way to replace all that export revenue that comes into government coffers and pays for our high standard of living, our hospitals, the NDIS, our defence assets, the pension, for everything we have in Australia. Now, the consequence of this was highlighted in a third story, also in The Australian, and that's at one of our largest manufacturing businesses. The plastics producer Qenos is likely to close due to the high price of electricity and gas, making us even more dependent on imports for everyday essential items. So adherence to the climate cult by successive governments, which the Albanese government has taken to new heights, is making you and me poorer and our country weaker. And further subsidies in the budget, as the PM was crowing about today, are just going to make a bad situation worse. It's a band-aid on a bullet wound. Meanwhile, a new poll, albeit commissioned, it seems, by the minerals industry, shows that 82% of us support the opening of new resource projects. 74% support the resource sector generally, including 51% support for it, even among Greens voters. And look, more craziness exposed, this time by the Australian's Adam Crichton, who details how the very calendar itself has been captured by leftist activists. No doubt what kicked all of this off for Adam was the huge news in the United States over the weekend when President Biden marked Easter Sunday, not as the day that our Lord is risen, but as, and I quote, Trans Visibility Day. Now, Biden likes to use his Catholicism as a marketing tool with the Christian right voting bloc, but who calls themselves a Christian and then wipes out Easter Sunday, regarded as the holiest day on the Christian calendar? As Crichton detailed in his column today, gender activists have quite literally colonised the calendar, with literally dozens of days now devoted to promoting radical causes. As well as Trans Visibility Day, there's also Asexuality Day on April 6, International Day of Pink this year on April 10, Lesbian Visibility Day, well, that's on April 26, the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Transphobia, that's May 17. It's also an official one with the UN too, so that's here in Australia as well. Then there's Pansexual and Pan-Romantic Awareness Day on May 24. The whole of June is dedicated to Gay Pride, with an LGBTQ Day on the 28th. There's International Non-Binary People's Day on July 14, followed by International Drag Day on July 16. September, reports Adam Crichton, is Sexual Health Month with Bisexuality Awareness Day on the 23rd. October is LGBT History Month with, listen to this one, National Coming Out Day on the 11th. International Pronoun Day, well, that's on the 19th. Intersex Awareness Day, that's the 26th. And Gender Fluid Visibility Week, that starts on the 24th. So while most of us have been distracted by just getting on with life, radical activists have been doing their best to subvert our culture by turning Australia Day into Invasion Day, for instance. Something our new Governor-General designate, Sam Mostyn, has called as Invasion Day, January 26, in the past. Now, unlike all of those other days designed to divide us into what some are and what others are not, Australia Day reminds us of everything we have in common. Our heritage of freedom and the wonderful Australian ethos. If you have a go, you'll get a fair go. No wonder the activists are against all of that. Let's hope Sam Mostyn can leave activism behind too, because partisanship of any sort and the office of our Governor-General do not mix. All right, let's go to Canberra now. We'll get the headlines. Sky News political reporter Cam Redden.
Good evening. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese believes the airstrike that killed Australian aid worker Zomi Frankham was a breach of international law.
Zomi Frankham should have been safe, and her being killed in this way is a catastrophic event.
Her friends and family want a war crimes investigation to be opened.
And if there could be some sort of closure, at least administratively, that would be great.
We were targeted deliberately.
The Prime Minister stopping short of endorsing their calls, instead demanding Israel publish the findings of its internal review into the incident.
What isn't good enough is the statements that have been made, including that this is just a product of war. This is against humanitarian law.
They admit the mistake, that those mistakes happen in an environment such as war, and I think we just need to be careful.
The fog of war is not an excuse.
Australia's outrage echoed by many of Israel's closest allies, who are now airing their frustrations privately and publicly.
Israel has both the intention and the ability to comply with international humanitarian law. I've made that very clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Whatever the mistake that happened inside the IDF, it's unacceptable.
The Prime Minister has dropped his strongest hint yet. There will be more power price relief included in the May budget. Around 5 million homes and 1 million small businesses had their prices reduced under Labor's energy bill relief package.
And as we put together next month's budget, small businesses and families will again be front and centre in our thinking.
He might be talking about energy price relief, but this is the same bloke who's overseen energy increases of 16% for electricity and about 27% for gas.
All right, let's look at the other big stories today. I'm joined now by media writer for The Australian, Sophie Ellsworth, and the Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, Daniel Wild. Now, that death of the Australian aid worker Zomi Frankom, you saw those comments there from the PM and others, and reports that he confronted the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu within hours of that strike that killed her. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Penny Wong has warned Israel must change course or face international isolation. But the Australian's foreign editor Greg Sheridan warns in the paper today that a tragic accident of war is no reason for Australia to change policy. Now, I'll note here, Daniel, it took the PM a couple of hours to speak with Netanyahu over this incident. Fair enough, it killed an Australian, but it was 2 or more weeks before he spoke to the Israeli PM when 1,200 Jews were slaughtered on October 7. So as tragic as his case is, I reckon we need to keep it in perspective, don't we?
I agree, Peter, and what we're seeing here before our eyes is the Jeremy Corbynisation of the Australian Labor Party. We know that the UK dodged a bullet in not having Jeremy Corbyn as their Prime Minister with his very divisive retrograde views. But there's a real issue here. We know that the Prime Minister has been looking for an opportunity to criticise Israel and its leadership, and it's using this tragic circumstance to do so. The other point I'd make, Peter, is, as you'd be aware, there's a real electoral political component to this, which is over the last 2 years, we've had 2 million migrants arrive to Australia. What that means is around 1 in 12 people who are here right now were born overseas within the last 24 months. The vast majority of those people are doing the right thing and subscribe to our values, but we know we've seen a lot of social division in our nation, and I'm concerned that it's only getting worse with this divisive approach of the government at the moment.
Well, you're right to pick up the Labor Party there. There's concern in the Jewish community that there might be now an overreaction by the Albanese government to what's happened here tragically to that Australian. But just on that point, Bob Carr, former Foreign Minister, of course, former Premier of New South Wales, he's been out on X, put out a tweet. It says Israel is now adding to its war crimes, and that is a big phrase to be used by a former Foreign Minister, the assassination of aid workers deliberately, I believe, to worsen food deprivation in Gaza. So what if rogue IDF personnel did it? They were encouraged and enabled, says Bob Carr, by the rhetoric of members of this rightist government. They are strong words, Sophie.
Well, they are, Peter, but can we just go back a step? We don't actually know the full extent of what has happened here, how it got to the point of these people being killed. So I think everyone just needs to take a deep breath. I understand it's obviously a very difficult situation for many involved, Peter, but we need to establish how this happened before we start jumping the situation here. And I think putting out tweets like that are not helpful.
I agree with that. Let's go now to that jobs data out from the Department of Social Services. Now, this is extraordinary. 50,000 Australians, says official data, have gone on the dole and or youth allowance in the last 5 months to February. Now, that's despite historically low unemployment rates and the fact that many businesses are looking for staff. Add in the fact that this week we saw stats come out that said almost 1 in 3 jobs created over the past year were jobs to service the NDIS. Well, Daniel, we've got almost 1 million people on the job. We've got businesses around the country desperate for workers. We've got, a great many people coming in via immigration as well. But my concern too is those NDIS jobs. I mean, this is a taxpayer paying there. It's a taxpayer paying for everybody on the dole. How's this sustainable?
Well, it isn't on the current rate, Peter. The issue we've got is the government is saying that its objective is to limit the growth of the NDIS to 8% a year. That's about 5% in real terms. Our economy is growing at about 2.5% in real terms. So even under the optimistic scenario, the NDIS will still be growing at double the rate as our entire economy. Now, whatever spending program or welfare program it is, if it's growing faster than the entire economy, you're setting up the nation for a financial calamity, and that is where we're headed. There's another point, Peter, which is the NDIS came into full in 2019. We then had the COVID lockdowns. If you look at the rate of welfare dependency, it skyrocketed in that period, and it has not dropped back down anywhere near to where it was prior to 2019. So we're seeing entrenched welfare dependency, and Australians not getting back into work.
We've got this related issue here about numbers too, Sophie. We've got this report out by the Centre of Independent Studies. I'm not talking about here people in the highest tax bracket. I'm talking, cumulatively across the board once you load in local government, state government and federal government taxation. But Australian households are now losing up to 45% of their income in taxes. I mean, this is significant. And we know that the tax revenues collected by federal and state governments will hit a 23-year high this year. Now, come the middle of the year, we get this $15 a week tax break. That's going to look like a drop in the ocean politically for the Prime Minister, isn't it?
Well, Peter, it is. I mean, looking today at these reports, we've got over 120 different taxes in Australia. What's $15? Is that a sandwich at the local shop? I mean, you can't even buy a sandwich some places here in Melbourne for $15. I don't think it's going to make a great lot of difference. And people will welcome tax relief when they get it, but that is a very small amount. And Peter, I think these tax rates are just too high for families and households. We're all feeling the pinch, across the board, across the population now, but it feels like the amount going out in taxes each week just seems to be growing and growing.
Let's go to the US. Wall Street Journal reports in a poll that Donald Trump leads President Biden in 6 of the battleground states in the lead up, obviously, to the November election. Trump's team and the Republican Party also say they've seen a massive surge in political donations. They've picked up more than $65 million in March. To put that in perspective, that's in a month and a half, we'd be lucky to spend $65 million all up in an Australian general election, all parties. Well, of course, Daniel, about to hit the convention season. The 2 majors, they'll front off, they'll have their convention. Hard to see that Trump won't be endorsed, obviously, as the Republican candidate. We could see a curveball. If we're going to see one, we'll see it from the Democrats at their convention. Or do you reckon they're going to lock in Biden, which, I tell you, if they lock in Biden, I think they're in trouble.
Well, I agree. Look, I think they're probably stuck with Biden now. I mean, who knows what they'll do? But look, what's so interesting to me, Peter, is every time the left tries to kill Donald Trump politically, they just make him stronger. And the reason for that is it reinforces the narrative that he's been saying all the way back to 2015 when he first started, which is that they are out, the political class is out to get Trump and to diminish the voice of the people he represents, because he's an enormously disruptive force to domestic politics in the US and also globally. Trump's support has only increased, even as the Democrats try to even take him off the ballot. That's how desperate they are. Trump's support only goes up. So look, he's looking stronger than in 2016. And if things keep going this way, we could see a real surprising result in November.
Let's go to the whole, I wouldn't say it's a saga. I think it's beyond a saga. I think it's now really an unedifying circus. We had that rape mistrial or alleged rape mistrial. We then had the prosecutor withdrawing any further trial action. We have a defamation action involving Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson and others. That's now been reopened. More testimony coming in. We'll go very quickly in a moment to Caroline Marcus to get the details on all of that. But we've also got another defamation action in relation to Linda Reynolds, the former boss of Brittany Higgins, of course, a cabinet minister. That now, Sophie, looks like it's headed to court.
It does, Peter, and this is just another development in what you're right. It's almost beyond a saga. We saw obviously the situation today with the Channel 10, Channel 7 in court regarding the Bruce Lerman defamation matter. We've now got this matter. I mean, it just keeps going on. And Peter, I will say that pretty much anyone who has gotten involved in this case with the Brittany Higgins, Bruce Lerman, alleged rape, has not ended up well. I mean, there's defamation cases flying around, and I think there'll be lawyers making a lot of money.
Not wrong there. Daniel Wild, Sophie Elsa, thank you very much. Let's go there now. Sky News senior reporter Caroline Marcus has been in court all day. This is about the reopened defamation case. Remember that hearing late on Tuesday night. Justice Lee heard preliminary arguments, decided to take full evidence. Caroline, for your sins, you've been in court hearing it all. What can you tell us?
Well, Peter, there's been some explosive allegations said in court today by Taylor Auerbach. Now, he was the former producer with the Spotlight program who was tasked, in his words, with babysitting Bruce Lerman while Mr. Lerman was in Sydney as Spotlight executives attempted to wine and dine him and court him into doing an exclusive series of interviews with the program. Now, Mr. Auerbach said on the stand that he had been at a dinner with Mr. Lerman and other members of the Spotlight team, and during that dinner, Mr. Lerman had ordered and bought a bag of cocaine. Mr. Auerbach said he later went back to a service department with Mr. Lerman, and Mr. Lerman put the drugs on a plate and proceeded to talk about his desire to order sex workers and proceeded to Google escort websites. Mr. Auerbach said that he actually texted a colleague at the time saying, "Bruce is on the warpath again. This is effed." He said Mr. Lerman paid for the expenses that evening, but later asked him to get Seven to reimburse them. He said he got in touch with me to say his bank account was dry after, for want of a better word, the bender. The plan was he was to issue an invoice for per diems that would be paid for by Seven. Now, these fresh claims follow another incident that happened weeks earlier, according to Mr. Auerbach, in which Thai masseurs were called to Mr. Auerbach's home for Mr. Lerman, he said. Seven has, through a statement, denied that these expenses were ever reimbursed and said that they always acted in good faith and they didn't do anything wrong, essentially. They've also disputed claims by Mr. Auerbach that instead of being fired when he admitted that he'd put these expenses on a corporate credit card, he was promoted and given a pay rise by Seven. Instead, Mr. Lerman's lawyers, under cross-examination of Mr. Auerbach, put it to him that he was willing to say anything in order to damage his former employer and some of the colleagues that he had grown to hate. They even played this video of Mr. Auerbach smashing golf clubs belonging to a former colleague of his that Mr. Auerbach had posted briefly to his social media. Mr. Auerbach said that was meant to just be a parody. Now, Mr. Auerbach also claimed he suffered sustained bullying and anti-Semitism at Seven. This was also disputed outside court by a senior executive at Seven. All of this, of course, has to do with the defamation trial. The new evidence was admitted because it may have relevance to Mr. Lerman's credibility and also how much damages Justice Michael Lee may decide to award him if he finds in his favour. The hearing continues tomorrow.
Well, you'll be there tomorrow. I'm glad it's you, not me. I think, as I said, it's all pretty unedifying at the moment. Caroline Marcus, thank you as always. All right, after the break, a delegation of Australian MPs prepare to visit Taiwan in what will be a real test of our relationship with China. Plus, the federal government refuses to release the advice which led to Brittany Higgins and that massive payout. Well, we've got the FOI details for you after the break, and the journalist who says he will keep fighting for the truth. Welcome back. Still ahead, what the federal government doesn't want you to know about the $2 million plus payout to Brittany Higgins. But let's go to some other issues. The relationship between Australia and China will face a true test as a high-level parliamentary delegation is shortly to visit Taiwan. Now, when I say high level, it's a delegation that includes the Deputy Chair of the Parliament's powerful Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. And that man, the member for Fisher, joins me now, Andrew Wallace. You're coming to us from beautiful Caloundra, half your luck, Andrew Wallace. I suspect there's plenty of people inside the government who are not happy about this visit to Taiwan. Explain why the trip's so important for you and what sort of signal you think it's going to send to China.
It's great to be with you, Peter. Look, this is a really important trip. It's important for Australian parliamentarians to demonstrate their support for the people of Taiwan. We're seeing a lot of grey zone activity. Even just today, we're seeing incursions into Taiwanese airspace, unprecedented level from Chinese People's Liberation Army aircraft. So it's really important in these difficult times for Australia to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people and the government of Taiwan.
Yeah, I have to say, Andrew, when you stand back and look at the last 2 years under this government and the relationship the Prime Minister has now, he will argue, mended with China, I think it's gone beyond mending to being quite obsequious. I mean, he railed against the Port of Darwin being controlled by a Chinese company as opposition leader. He basically gave it his blessing just before Christmas. He's done a whole lot of stuff now in relation to lifting tariffs, withdrawing action in the WTO about wind turbine towers. They're about to flood the market in Australia. How are we being perceived by the Taiwanese? Do they think we're going soft? Give us a sense of some of the meetings you're going to have while you're in Taipei.
Well, I've got meetings with the President, the Foreign Affairs Minister, the Defence Minister, my counterparts on the Taiwanese Intelligence and Security Committee there. But I think you're absolutely right. The point that you made earlier is that this government is sending mixed messages in relation to China. And it's really important that, when we're in government, we're pretty solid in relation to China, but Prime Minister Albanese is all over the shop. 1 minute he wants to be China's best friend. The next minute we're spending a couple of $100 billion on submarines to counter the threat. And whilst that's a good thing, I think our friends and allies need consistency from the Australian government, and they're not getting it.
Right, I'll ask you about another trip too, because we heard this last week and I spoke to Michael Danby, who himself had just come back from Kyiv, but there was official DFAT advice reported saying they don't want, the federal government doesn't want any delegations of Australian MPs to go to Ukraine. Now, I find that extraordinary, particularly given, as I said, Michael Danby's been there, Tony Abbott's been there, a whole lot of politicians or former politicians have visited there quite safely. And of course, we're one of the only countries who once had an embassy in Ukraine who were still hiding out in Poland. Everybody else seems to have gone back. Do you think we should be in Ukraine as well in a delegation?
Look, the committee, the PJCIS committee, the Intelligence and Security Committee, has received an invitation to travel to Ukraine. I have said that I would go tomorrow if I could. I think it's really important that we show solidarity, not just with Taiwan, not just with Israel, but also with Ukraine. In all of these trouble spots, it's very important that liberal democracies like Australia support Ukraine. There are now 67 embassies that have reopened back in Kyiv out of the 81 that were there prior to the invasion. Unfortunately, Australia is not one of them, and I think it's an unnecessarily very cautious approach that DFAT is taking. I think that that's something that we really should be doing, and that's reopening our embassy back in Kyiv.
Yeah, and I take your point about solidarity, Andrew, but we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in Ukraine, helping them fight for everyone's freedom. I want to see that the money's hitting the ground. I mean, that's a good reason to go, if nothing else, isn't it?
Well, look, I mean, when we were in government, we were the largest non-NATO contributor to defence material being sent to Ukraine. We have slipped well and truly down that list now since the Labor government have taken the reins. And if you look at the last military shipment of equipment that we sent over, it was material that was dating back to the Vietnam War era of armoured personnel carriers and the like. So, the Defence Department have done a clear out of their garage sale and have got rid of some surplus material. But, I think that we should be stepping up with things like our helicopters that we're not using and are being threatened to be buried into the ground. Those Taiwan helicopters, in my view, could be saving lives on the battlefield in Ukraine, where it's just so incredibly important to get casualties back to field hospitals as quickly as possible.
All right, I would look forward to speaking when you get back from Taiwan, Andrew, if I could, because I'm keen on your observations, and I'm also keen to see what the reaction of Beijing is going to be to this delegation. Thank you for your time. All right, let's go now to that never-ending saga involving Brittany Higgins. I'm going to concentrate here, though, on that payout that you paid for. It was revealed today that the federal government is refusing to release the legal advice that resulted in that $2.4 million payout to the Liberal staffer, who, of course, now lives permanently in France. Joining me now for more on the story is the Daily Telegraph journalist, James Willis. Well, James, welcome. This Freedom of Information request was submitted some months ago. What did you actually receive from the government once you got your paperwork in?
Peter, great to be with you on your outstanding program. This has been a really frustrating campaign for the Daily Telegraph because back in January, we asked for a very simple question in regards to the $2.4 million payout awarded to Brittany Higgins in late 2022. And that was the legal advice that was required for any compensation claim of more than $100,000, where the government had to be told if they took this claim to court, or if the complainant, in this case Brittany Higgins, took the claim to court, what the chances were and what the risks were for the Commonwealth. If it was more than $100,000, they had to get legal advice from the Solicitor General. We've had a 6-page document come back where there's correspondence from the Attorney General's Department, the Attorney General's Office, where Mark Dreyfus has been involved in this, the Finance Department. The legal advice is on this document and has been completely blacked out, with the Attorney General's Department arguing legal professional privilege.
And of course, we know the legal advice is important because the legal advice was one of the things the government held over Michaelia Cash and Linda Reynolds, both who had employed Brittany Higgins, and very unusually, in my long experience with staffing matters, very unusually were barred, or at least threatened, with losing government support for their legal costs if they were to challenge this payout to Higgins. I understand there are other documents you're also blocked from receiving.
Yeah, so we asked for every bit of legal advice and the correspondence between the Attorney General's Department and the Attorney General and the Finance Department in the lead up to Brittany Higgins receiving this $2.4 million claim. 17 documents relating to that case were discovered. This is after the FOI decision maker delayed this twice. We've had to wait 3 months for this to come back. 17 documents discovered, all of them refused. 6 documents were released to us, and they are literally entirely blacked out, apart from the names of the people that are the various bureaucrats in these departments. I find it interesting as well, Peter, that the Assistant Secretary in the Attorney General's Department that oversaw this and effectively was the communication link of all this legal advice between the Minister and his department is the same person that has decided not to release this to us and is effectively the FOI spokesperson for that department. So the whole thing stinks, and we won't be stopping here. We're going to now go to the Information Commissioner and appeal to try and get this out of here. And any smell around this is not an attack on Brittany Higgins. This is all about the government rushing through this compensation claim after a one-day mediation, not allowing Senator Reynolds and Senator Cash to appear, otherwise they would miss out on their Commonwealth legal advice. The whole thing stinks, and as a result, the public is entitled to know what that legal advice is.
I'll say this again. For 6 years, I was Chief of Staff to the opposition leader, so managing all of the staff across the opposition. And then obviously the 2 years with the Prime Minister managing all the staff, only 500 across the coalition, and 16 years in federal politics. James Willis, I have never in my life seen any decision both of this quantum or handled with this alacrity and secrecy. Do not give up. Thank you for your time. Well done so far. Let's keep going on that one. We have got to know how on earth that decision was made and why. And why. All right, after the break, some very mixed reactions to the appointment of our new Governor-General designate, Sam Mostyn, plus all those days that divide us. Just why on earth are we following some of that UN schedule? And Queensland's first pill testing clinic, it's about to open, meaning are we going to turn a blind eye to people carrying illicit drugs? I'll explain a bit more on that in a moment. Welcome back. The latest green lawfare that's going to make our power prices skyrocket. I'll get to that in a moment with the Environment Editor at the Australian, Graham Lloyd. But first, let's bring in my panel, former Liberal MP Nicole Flint and Pauline Hanson's Chief of Staff James Ashby. Welcome to you both. I want to start with our new Governor-General designate, Sam Mostyn. Mixed reactions. You read, let's say, the Sydney Morning Herald, and you might read the Australian. You think you've got two completely different people there. By the way in which it's been reported. She was, of course, a Labor staffer in the Keating era. She's been a strong advocate for gender equality. She wants quotas for female MPs as an example. She's big on climate change. I suspect she's a Republican, looking at previous things she said. And she's referred to Australia Day as Invasion Day. Well, Nicole, what do you think? Is this a political appointment or a good and sound vice-regal one?
Well, arguably, Peter, all appointments of Governor-Generals are political appointments because the decision is made by the Prime Minister, who puts a recommendation to the now King. All I can say is I sincerely hope that our new Governor-General is able to put her personal political and policy beliefs aside and undertake her task in a completely bipartisan manner. I think that's what all Australians will expect and will want to see.
James, it's interesting. I played some grabs from a podcast she did after the Voice referendum. I did this at the top of the show, but this is the stuff that she has said about the Voice referendum. She said, after it, I felt completely untethered. I thought perhaps we were a big enough nation. She means to vote for the Voice. She says, I am horrified to think about what I thought of Australia growing up with the Captain Cook story and no mention of First Peoples or frontier wars. All of that was hidden from us. It is a catastrophe. Sorry, it was a catastrophe. And I think of all of that leading to what we saw in the referendum. James, what do you think?
Well, I would have loved to have seen the shortlist, to be quite honest with you, Peter. Look, her appointment had to be expected. All I can say, it's one better than Linda Burney. But the issue that I see is that there is too much background there where I think she's going to go into this a little hot and cold amongst some within the public and certainly those within the politicians' ranks. But let's face it, she's not the first one to have her own opinions. Quentin Bryce certainly raised her political opinions even in the job of Governor-General when she was very open about passing the gay marriage. She certainly was a Republican herself and she'd said it while she was Governor-General. I just think that if you are pro-Republic, it should rule you instantly out of the role of Governor-General. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And look, I think you should also decline it. You know, like if we were a republic, let's say, and someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, Peter, be the president, I'd say, no, thank you very much. I didn't support a republic. I still don't support a republic, even if we were one. Just decline it. You know, they seem so craven that they would take these jobs to represent institutions they don't even agree with. Let's go to Elon Musk. This is interesting, Nicole. Social media company, of course, X was Twitter, is suing the Australian government after the E-Safety Commissioner ordered the platform to pay an $800,000 fine to remove an anti-transgender post. The post criticised the proposal to appoint an Australian transgender activist to a World Health Organization healthcare panel. What's your thoughts?
Well, this is why it's difficult, of course, to regulate commentary, regulate free speech. And Peter, the question is, what is the line between free speech and abuse or comments that are harmful? And having had a look at this particular matter, the individual that I assume may have made the complaint is guilty of, if they are true, and I do believe they are, I did some reading up on this, is guilty of some truly reprehensible information out there on X itself. So there's sort of a weird double standard going on here, and it's an issue that policymakers are going to have to grapple with. As viewers are well aware, I've been very vocal on the need to protect women from disgusting abuse, and not just abuse, but threats of sexual assault, threats of physical harm to them. That needs to be cleaned up. The tech giants have to be held to account, but we also have to work out what that line is between free speech and actually cleaning up horrendous things like child sexual abuse material, for example, or damaging, dangerous pornography, et cetera, or acts of terrorism, criminal acts. There has to be a way to do this. I'm sure there is a way to do this, but this is an example of where things can go too far, and it is really verging on censorship.
Hey, just quickly, James, I've got to ask you, pill testing. So what happens when this new pill testing site opens in Brisbane later this month? Am I allowed to now walk around with drugs in my possession against the law? And if someone pulls me over, I just say, oh, don't worry, I'm just taking them to the pill testing centre. Is that what we're going to do?
It's a sad state of affairs here in Queensland, and yeah, it sends the wrong message. And of course, police are going to be confused on how to deal with this. What's the point of having sniffer dogs when this issue raises its ugly head? I spoke to some former addicts recently, and you know what they said to me? There's no such thing as a good drug. Pill testing won't save your life because it doesn't then give you the dosage on which to take. And as we saw recently, a 40-year-old woman, quite successful in her own right, took these so-called party drugs, these social drugs, and where is she? She's dead. She's in a box right now, and she's hoping, well, her family are hoping that the public get behind and donate so they can get her body back to New Zealand. It's very sad. There's no good way to look at this. It's tragic, and I tell you what, if One Nation have a say in the next parliament, we'll be reversing this. It's got to go.
James Ashby, Nicole Flint, thank you very much. Right after the break, green lawfare, crazy green lawfare. This is about a mine in Queensland. It'll impact power prices after the break. Welcome back. The largest proposed coal mine in the nation is under threat from activists who are attempting to shut it down, citing environmental and human rights concerns to challenge the project approvals. The Environment Defenders Office, you pay for them. Well, it's bringing forward the claim against Whitehaven's Winchester South mine in Queensland on behalf of the Australian Conservation Foundation and the Mackay Conservation Group. For more on this, I'm joined now by the Australian's Environment Editor, Graham Lloyd. Well, I reckon this is just more green lawfare, but we need coal because coal's still 60% of our power. So what's the main objection here that they're pushing on, and how likely is it to succeed, Graham?
Well, good evening, Peter. This is more confirmation of the relentless nature of lawfare in the climate space. It's a variation on a claim that's been made before. Basically, coal and mining coal produces emissions. That's bad for the environment, so it takes away rights from people, largely been rejected in the higher courts, but had some small success in the Queensland Land Court. And that's where this claim is now being taken. The argument has historically been that burning coal creates emissions. This is mainly coking coal to make steel. So the twist is that mining the coal will have fugitive emissions, and therefore that's why it should be stopped.
So what's this mean for future projects if it gets up?
Well, it's a significant development if it does get up, but again, it is in the land court. What it will mean is the government will have to make a decision about the mine. It can choose to accept or reject the finding, but generally they accept them. And if this is not allowed to proceed, very hard to see how a similar decision wouldn't be made about other projects. But environment groups want to say, look, this will be the end of coal. I think we're a little way off from that. It will certainly be appealed if it were to go against the company.
I wrote in the Australian, my Thursday column today about the nature positive plan, Labor's plan. The more I dug into it, mate, I'd have to tell you, is absolutely terrifying. We haven't got much time, but what's the time frame here? When do they want this through?
Well, they're really going through the process of framing the legislation, and if you look at the way they've approached things like IR, you can expect that they'll ram it through as fast as they can. And your column today got to the heart of it. This has been strategised for a long period of time. They're trying to remove the decision powers from government into an independent EPA, and that will be really run by environment groups.
Graham Lloyd, thank you. Viewers at home, I'll get back into that whole issue next week. We're going to talk to the Coalition and see where they are on it. But that's it for me. I'll see you back here Monday night at 6 o'clock. Here's Andrew Wallace.